Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Till We Have Faces. I almost said the wrong thing. Let's call it the Mythgard Academy, in which we have session 9 of Till We Have Faces. That is precisely where we are tonight. And tonight is a big session. We are going to be looking at the big apocalypse in the middle of the book. This is the turning point in the story. And really kind of the second biggest moment of the entire book. Really, the ending is the biggest moment of the entire book. But this moment is pretty huge. And I have a certain amount of confidence that we'll actually make it through chapters 14 and 15 tonight. That is our goal, so we'll see how we do. But before we get started, I want to fulfill the promise that I made last week and do a drawing, because it's our fundraising campaign, and I want to do a drawing, as I promised I would, our weekly drawing for all the folks who filled out our Mythgard Academy form. Put your name and email into the form. So I've got my dice, and I'm gonna roll. There we go, and we have the winner is Takako Tasai. Takako won. Congratulations, Takako. All right. Excellent. Takako's always wishing she could take all of the space classes and all of the MA classes. Awesome. Congratulations, Takako. And we'll do another drawing next week. So when we redistribute the link, it's the same link as last week. So you can fill in the same form again. And let me make sure I get the link again. So I'll give you the link one more time here. Okay. And there is the link. So you can go ahead and submit that again now, and we'll start afresh from this new point next week. There we go. Excellent. Very good. Just making a mark as to where the old one stopped. There we go. Now we'll remember next time. Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. Congratulations, Takako. We'll do another drawing next week. Now, let's get into the text, because we've got big chapters to discuss. So, the last 2 weeks, we've been looking at Orual's deliberations, as she's been contemplating what to do. Right? She had her meeting with Psyche, and she's been considering how to respond to this, how to interpret this. And there have really been sort of 3 options. One is the reverent but cautious acknowledgement of the gods that Bardia lives out, right? He reveres the gods, but he really hopes that they won't pay attention to him, right? And his interpretation, of course, of what was going on with Psyche is that the god was that the god was coming to her, right? But it was the hideous shadow brute, which is why it didn't want to be seen. And then, of course, the fox has his interpretation of what was going on, that it was a man, a beggar, or a thief, or a murderer, some criminal or outcast, who was deceiving Psyche. And he thought that was the perfectly obvious explanation of the thing. But there was a third reading of it as well. And that was Orual's own response, that she herself was fighting against often and was sort of pushing down. And that was the possibility that Psyche was telling the truth, that it would be, in fact, the right thing to leave Psyche in her happiness. And really, those were kind of almost separated, right? One was, could she dare to believe that what Psyche said was true? Could she be willing to believe even the vision that was given to her of the palace? And that was not something she entertained very much, right? But it came up, not just initially in the early parts of her first conversation with Psyche, but even later at the end. And I don't just mean at the end when she saw the vision. I mean at the end of her contemplations, like at the end of chapter 14, after she's talked to both Bardia and the fox, she's still thinking, maybe, right? But related to that is, do I just let her be happy, right? Even if she is being, no matter, like, does it matter what's actually happening, right? Maybe I just let her be happy. So that's where we left off. So let's pick back up there, beginning of chapter 15. She returns. Bardia can't come with her this time, so she returns in the company of the taciturn Graham, who was chosen because he never speaks. So he is one of the most quiet, introverted members of the guard. And so he, though not seeming to like the adventure much, is taking her up to the mountain. So we begin with her thoughts as she's going up the mountain. Beginning of 14. Did I say 15? Beginning of 14. Sorry. Yes, beginning of chapter 14. Suddenly there rose up before me the memory of Psyche in the mountain valley. Sorry, we did this at the end of last time. This is a passage at the very end of chapter 13. I wanted to reread this to make sure that we have this in our minds as we get into chapter 14 in the actual meeting. Suddenly there rose up before me the memory of Psyche in the mountain valley, bright face, brimming over with joy. My terrible temptation came back, to leave her in that full happy dream, whatever came of it, to spare her, not to bring her down from it into misery. Must I be to her an avenging fury, not a gentle mother? And part of my mind now was saying, do not meddle, anything might be true. You are among marvels that you do not understand. Carefully, who knows what ruin you might pull down on her head and yours? But with the other part of me I answered that I was indeed her mother, and her father too, all she had of either. That my love must be grave and provident, not slipshod and indulgent. That there is a time for love to be stern. After all, what was she but a child? If the present case were beyond my understanding, how much more must it be beyond hers? Children must obey. It had hurt me long ago when I made the barber pull out the thorn. Had I not none the less done well? I hardened my resolution. I knew now which of two things I must do, and no later than on the day which would soon be breaking. All right. So that big paragraph there really helps us to remember the complicated situation that Orual is in, right? Notice how both of the two things that I was just referring to come up there in the first half of the paragraph. They're related to each other, but they're not identical, right? One is what she calls the terrible temptation to leave Psyche to her full happy dream, right? Not to spare her, not to bring her down from it into misery. Even if she is deluded, even if she is being deceived, she is happy. Must I be to her an avenging fury, not a gentle mother? She knows, she feels she's going to cause her suffering if she wakes her up. If she is in a full happy dream, well, she's in a dream, and waking up from that is going to be harsh. But she acknowledges, she characterizes this as a temptation, right? That is to say, she does not feel she knows it's not the right thing. She feels the desire to do it, but she knows it's not the right thing. And she even calls it a terrible temptation, right? But then remember, there is where we get the segue. Part of my mind was saying, do not meddle, anything might be true. You are among marvels that you do not understand. Who knows what ruin you might pull down on her head and yours? So, two things about this that I would emphasize. One is, again, this is connected. She segues into this from that terrible temptation, right? That is to say, in her mind, let Psyche continue in her delusion or deception is like a first cousin, in a sense, right? To the thought that says, I'm among marvels that I don't understand. Anything might be true, right? They're not the same, but they're connected in some sense in her mind. Those are the two things that are kind of together on the one side of this equation, right? And what it sounds like, in a sense, is that there is, because of course, the foundation, right? The foundation, there are two main issues at play in the first part, in the terrible temptation. One is the gentle mother impulse, right? The loving impulse to, the loving impulse to see Psyche be happy, right? Just to see her be pleased, even if it's not in her best interest, long term, right? Or even short term, maybe. And that's why it's a terrible temptation. But of course, the other part of that's the other part. One is the benevolent impulse, the loving impulse, but the other is the knowledge, right? The confidence that to do it is that it's the wrong thing to do. The assertion, the assumption even, that she clearly knows better than Psyche. If she did not have the premise, even here, that she definitely knows better than Psyche, she wouldn't call it a temptation, right? She wouldn't characterize it as a full, happy dream. So one of the ways in which we're segueing from the first thought to the second thought there, right? From the terrible temptation to the anything might be true thought, is, it seems, an erosion of confidence, right? But what if I am wrong and she's right, right? That willingness to question that, in one sense, that's the path that her mind leads her down here, right? From the terrible temptation to the acknowledgement, well, anything might be true. Maybe she's right and I'm wrong. And notice the parallel. If she leaves her to her full happy dream, she's not bringing her down from her dream into misery, right? To try to wake her up from the dream would be to bring her down into misery. But to try to pull her out, if Psyche's right and Orual's wrong, would be pulling ruin down on her head as well as yours, right? So that idea of that fall, the fall from happiness to misery, the fall from grace to ruin, right, are paralleled in those two thoughts, right? And in both, and this is one of the ways. So although the two impulses, the terrible temptation impulse and the anything might be true impulse, are in a sense in opposition to each other, they also, as I say, they're kind of first cousins. They also kind of rhyme with each other in this sense. Both of them, both of them push her in the same direction, which is, don't do anything. Don't do anything, because if you do, you could bring about Psyche's fall. Either her fall from happiness, even dream happiness, into misery, or her fall from grace and favor and privilege into ruin, right? Both of those, therefore, in opposition as they are, though as I say, they also fit, they also rhyme with each other, they're both together on the opposite pole against that other part of her. which says, I am her mother and her father, and my love must be grave and provident. There's no time to be indulgent. It's time for love to be stern. And she remembers how much it had hurt her when the barber pulled out the thorn, right? To see medicinal pain being inflicted. She didn't want to do that, but she knows. She is old and wise enough to know, Orual is, that that's the right thing to do. Why is she Psyche's father also, Jackie? Because Psyche's father is horrible, right? Orual several times has mentioned the functional abdication of Psyche's father, right? But I think, Jackie, it's kind of it's double-sided, right? On the one hand, she says it as a judgment against Psyche's father, the king, her own father, right? She means it as a statement about how terrible he is, and as a dad, like, he's useless. So she has had no choice but to step in and be the father as well as the mother, because no one was doing either role, right? So she has taken both roles upon herself. But of course, remember how much Orual looks like her dad sometimes, right? And so there is a kind of memory. To some extent, her condemnation of Psyche's father kind of bounces back on herself a little bit too. That is to say, in that different sense, it's sometimes a little too uncomfortably true that she is Psyche's father. She's just like Psyche's father too often. Yeah, and Jackie, you were right. There are times when the fox is kind of like the dad in their little alternate family. Yes. And the fox thinks of himself that way, right? He thinks of Psyche like his daughter, as he thinks of Orual as his daughter, right? But remember, there have been several occasions on which Orual has already, during this crisis, ever since the revelation that Psyche was to be sacrificed, where Orual has kind of grudged Psyche's relationship with the fox and kind of, in her own mind, sort of distanced him from her, right? Yeah, Mary, you're right. He does. Her father also did kind of send her to her death. That's also, I agree, a black mark against him from a paternal standpoint. Yes. But exactly as Morgul Hamster was just pointing out, there too, we will soon see Orual resembling her father. But more on that anon. Now, we can, having thought carefully about those first two movements, right? The terrible temptation and the terrible temptation and the anything might be true. We can see one of the major movements that has happened, right? What she's done is essentially returned to the terrible temptation frame of mind in at least one crucial way. And that way is in believing with sublime confidence that she obviously knows better than Psyche what's what. She, after all, what was she but a child, right? The infantilization of Psyche here. Remember, that's one of the things that she got angry at the fox about. The fox was upset to think about Psyche being deceived, Psyche being seduced, by an outcast, by a criminal. But remember, he started talking about, what is marriage, but, the union of, he who, persuades with she who consents. And, in other words, he was treating her like an adult. And Orual won't, right? Orual won't. What was she but a child? And then that really telling sentence, if the present case were beyond my understanding, how much more must it be beyond hers? Since I'm the grown-up here, right? The one thing which is obviously an absurdity would be for her to understand the situation better than me, right? Yeah, and Sarah, I agree. Orual doesn't make the argument that Psyche's too young to be married, just too young to think or decide for herself in any way that goes against what Orual wants. Yes, it's not about like, oh, no, she's too young to make up her mind. This is, I remember having that conversation with my wife's parents when we wanted to get married. They were a little uncertain. It was one of those really fun cultural things. We were 23 when we got married. And, her parents were all like, are you sure you're not rushing into it? You're still both very young. You might want to think this through. And my family was all like, finally, we thought he'd never get married. Anyway, people get married young in my family. Anyhow, point is, that's not the kind of discussion she's having here, right? She's very much wanting to keep Psyche, to convince herself that Psyche is still is a child who must obey, right? It's all about the relationship between them. It's not anything objectively about Psyche's own sort of external status. It's all about their relative relationship with each other, right? And Feanaro, I think that's perfectly fair. That Orual is living such a lonely life, that Orual living such a lonely life impacts how she can see things from only one perspective. Yes, though the kind of qualification I'd give is that she was lonely. She hasn't been lonely. There was this, well, there are kind of several things, right? Yes, she was very lonely before Psyche, but there was still the fox before Psyche, and there was Redival from page 1 of the story. She was never actually alone, though she felt lonely in lots of ways, and I'm not trying to discount that. Right. The loneliness that seems to me most operative in Orual's decisions and in her rationales is the future-oriented one, right? Where she is imagining what will her life be without Psyche. There's a sense in which she is having a sort of a rather special version of empty nest anxiety, right? Where she has formed so much of her own identity around Psyche and being Psyche's quasi-mom, right? That if Psyche were to leave, she would be nothing. And remember that Psyche herself, before the sacrifice, was saying things like, look, sooner or later this was going to happen, probably sooner, right? If it hadn't been human sacrifice, it would have been a different kind of human sacrifice, like me being sent off to marry, the son of a foreign king, in which case we also never would have seen each other again, right? That also would be a kind of death. Remember that speech. Orual didn't want anything to do with that either. She was not, Psyche was thinking about it and ready to think about it. Orual was not, right? So it's that idea of what would she be now without Psyche? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So let's keep going. Having thought that through a little bit. All right. This is chapter 14 now. I went to the ford, about a long bow shot from Graham. My heart was still as ice, heavy as lead, cold as earth. But I was free now from all doubting and deliberating. I set my foot on the first stone of the crossing and called Psyche's name. She must have been very close, for almost at once I saw her coming down to the bank. We might have been two images of love, the happy and the stern. She so young, so bright-faced, joy in her eye and limbs. I, burdened and resolute, bringing pain in my hand. Let's pause for a second on another beautiful paragraph. Man, so good. C.S. Lewis is an excellent composer of English sentences on his worst day. The writing of Till We Have Faces contained few of his bad days. But remember also the particular scene that he's playing off of here. If you remember, on the night after her first conversation with Psyche, remember she leaves Psyche and then goes back to Bardia, and there's that whole return to the mortal world thing, right? And the meal that they have around the fire and sleeping back to back, and her being a little distracted by that, and her sleepless night, right? All those things. One of the fantasies she was having during her sleepless night was that she would hear Psyche's voice calling out to her, Maya, Maya, and she would run down to the river to help her across, right? And Orual seems herself not to remember that connection, not to see that what she is doing is reversing. And I stopped before making the main point that in that fantasy, that was a fantasy of comfort that it was a comforting fantasy to Orual as she was trying to come to grips with things. And the reason it was comforting is that it restored their relationship, right? Where Psyche was the scared and needy one, and she, Orual, was the maternal and protective one, right? Gathering Psyche in to comfort her and guide her, right? And remember, that dynamic was very, very strong in their conversation in the room with five sides before the sacrifice, right? Here in this first paragraph, we see Orual in fact, not just in fantasy, but in fact, reversing that, right? She is the one who is calling out Psyche's name. Psyche, Psyche, coming down to the river, calling Psyche's name. And Psyche comes quickly. Almost at once, I saw her coming down to the bank. Exactly how she described herself in her own fantasy, coming down to help Psyche over, right? And yet again, she still is firmly convinced, even within this paragraph itself, firmly convinced that she's the grown-up here, right? That she's the one who knows what's what. And Psyche is the one who needs guidance. We might have been two images of love, the happy and the stern. On the one hand, she doesn't begin by questioning Psyche's love, right? That is, they're both images of love, right? She doesn't challenge or undermine Psyche or Psyche's lovingness, right? And even her description, her perception of Psyche's beauty, of course, she can't help that, right? But even her description of happy love as young, bright face, joy in her eye and limbs, that's one vision of love. Orual, is the other image of love, the stern image of love, burdened and resolute, bringing pain in my hand. You see, there's an irony here, which is also, I think, I think it's not at the absolute root, but it is near the root of Orual's problem. If both of them are images of love, love for whom? What love are they indicating? Do you see what I mean? That is, the stern love that Orual comes with is stern love for Psyche. The happy love that Psyche is experiencing, young, bright-faced, joy in her eye and limbs, is that love for Orual? Yes. But it's also love for her husband, right? Yeah. And that, I think, again, is part of the problem. One of the things that we're seeing is the sternness of Orual's love is all directed at Psyche, right? But Psyche's love is divided between Orual and her husband. At least those are the two ways I think that Orual feels it, that Orual perceives it, right? But the irony is that it seems to me that Orual is not understanding either one of those loves, right? What she doesn't understand, which Psyche has tried to explain, but Orual doesn't understand, is that she doesn't have less love for her just because she has a husband now. She still has her love for her Maya is undiminished and wouldn't be diminished by her love for her husband. But Orual's love is, of course, not directed, as much as she likes to convince herself, 100% on Psyche. It's directed very significantly at herself. I see you guys talking about bright face, and Jackie, totally agree that we have both Greek and Hebrew, right? Greek and biblical associations with bright face. Bright face being the radiant light, especially from the face of one who has seen and encountered God. Most notably, Moses, of course, descending from Mount Sinai. What did Moses do when he came down from Mount Sinai? No, I mean, okay, there's a lot of potential answers to that question. What did he do with his face when he comes down, right? And everyone's like, whoa, we're freaked out. Moses turned down the high beams. What did he do? He veiled his face. He put a veil on, right? Because he was too bright-faced. The reflected glory of God that shone from his face after his encounter with God was too much for the people, and he put a veil over his face. That might be important later. Similarly, the other big, major, really important bright face moment in the Bible, I think that's fair to say. On the one hand, you've got Moses, and on the other hand, you have the transfiguration of Jesus. Yeah, absolutely. And remember, he also puts on a sort of veil at the end of that, right? The glory of God is reflected in him, and he shines white, his clothes shining way whiter than anybody could bleach them. Like, no matter how good you are at bleaching things, like, no way you could get it as white. I love that description. But anyway, it's such a homely moment in the gospel narratives. But anyway, so But remember, right afterwards, right when his high beams get turned down, right when the light and the glory stops, Jesus immediately tells Peter, James, and John, who are up there with him, don't tell anybody, right? Keep this to yourselves. Don't tell anybody about what you saw, right? So again, it's a more metaphorical. It's not. Moses puts on a literal veil. Jesus's veil is more figurative. But that same idea of I'm going to continue covering my face. I'm not going to reveal the glory of my face in the same way. Is bright-face Lewis's coinage? What he said before. Now, I don't know the Greek word that he's talking about, but he was speaking as if there is a Greek word. When Orual Orual the narrator first uses the word bright-face, she explicitly says she was so bright-face, as the Greeks would say. That leads me to believe, though I don't know enough Greek to be able to put my finger on it, that there is a Greek word here. That like Greek has a word for this that English does not have. And so that Lewis is basically kind of like borrowing it from Greek, the concept from Greek more or less directly. Anyway, so yeah. I don't know what the Greek word is. But as I say, it's not just the Bible exemplars that we should have in mind, but the Greek exemplars, one of which we've already been given. Remember when Anchises wakes up in the myth that the fox is telling Orual way back at the beginning, right after the fox came, and telling her the myth of Anchises and Aphrodite. And when Anchises wakes up and he sees the goddess revealed in her glory and says, "Slay me, for I have lain, with the goddess." That moment, right? She, Aphrodite, is bright face, and he doesn't use the word. The English translation doesn't use the word there, right? But that's clearly the concept, right? Again, this revelation of glory. Yes. I can confirm, I do believe, in fact, that urine was used for bleach in the ancient world. Yeah. Pretty sure that that's the case. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, a little side discussion about exactly how mortals go about bleaching things really well. That was how. Okay. Anyway, the bright-facedness of Psyche in her vision of love, therefore, seems also very relevant, right? It is the very revelation of reflected divinity in Psyche. Reflected, at least reflected, right? If not, in fact, an indication of her own progressive apotheosis, right? Remember how she seemed to be growing taller, right? How she's getting stronger, all of those things. She seems to be transitioning from mortal to goddess. And the bright face observations seem to be a kind of acknowledgement of that. Anyway, okay. But I only read the first paragraph. "You spoke last time," I said, "of the day we got the thorn out of your hand. We hurt you that time, Psyche, but we did right. Those who love must hurt. I must hurt you again today. And Psyche, you are still little more than a child. You cannot go your own way. You will let me rule and guide you." Orual begins with a very hard line, right? She begins in very strong parental talk here. And JJ, she is speaking down to her, Absolutely. Absolutely. You are still little more than a child. Now, the thing that I would recall, and I want to be fair to, or I mean, look, needless to say, this chapter is going to present Orual in just about her worst light in the entire book. So, I mean, I'm not going to, go to massive extremes to try to defend her, but it's important to remember that I don't know. I read this paragraph this evening as the parent of a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I can testify to the temptation to speak to my adult and almost adult children and still operate within the framework that says you are still little more than a child. And it's even kind of true in its own ways. And I certainly am well aware of the many, many years of experience that I have over them. And it's very hard for me not to remember and imagine to remember all the times when I spoke to them when they were children, right? Anyway, it's all, I can resonate with this pretty clearly. So is she talking down to her? Absolutely she is, right? Is she wrong to do this? Oh yeah. Psyche has shown her we've been looking already way back from when they were in the room with five sides. The greatly increased clarity and sophistication, that is the comparative insight and sophistication of Psyche's processing of things compared to Orual's, right? I mean, we do not, if there is a discrepancy in their wisdom and experience, it would seem almost the opposite, but I can't blame Orual for not seeing that in a sense. The Thorn conversation, the Thorn story wasn't given until we've gotten these references to it here. Emily, that's a good point. And Orual never had a mother figure to learn better from. Yeah, and I see several of you are referring to, sort of telling, or at least alluding to stories of parents or parents-in-law who still speak to their, 50-year-old children this way. And I agree. That's the other side of that is very painful too, right? And both realities are very much in play here, right? Both realities are things that we're supposed to be thinking of. It's easy to imagine oneself into Orual's frame of mind here, but it is equally easy to see that it is insulting and damaging to Psyche, and more importantly, to Orual's relationship with Psyche, to talk to her like that, right? If you would like to preserve a relationship of mutual love and respect with your adult children, probably don't do this, right? Probably don't do this. But yeah, I totally agree, Eric, that it's not healthy for the parents either. Absolutely. But again, notice again, I know this sort of sounds like me defending Orual, but notice again how patient she's being. She's not yelling at her, right? Yet. She is patiently explaining. Her use of the plural, which several of you pointed to. We hurt you that time, but we did right. Those who love must hurt. I think she is being specifically imprecise here. I think she's being purposefully imprecise. Yeah, the fox was almost certainly involved as well. But remember how there are, well, remembering ahead, we're going to see there will be other times in this conversation when she basically is going to be invoking the authority of the fox and of Bardia, both, on her side, right? To basically attempt to maneuver Psyche into a position where Psyche is being asked to acknowledge that she is all on her own against everyone that she loves and respects, right? I think that her use of we there is the first gestures in that direction. I represent all of the grown-ups that you have always loved, admired, and respected, right? I speak in the collective voice of all of them, vaguely, right? I think that's what she's going for there. Yeah, good. Fire Swans. Yeah, you were thinking very similarly there. I think that's right. Morgul Hamster asks a great question. Is she right? Must we hurt those we love? In the sense she's talking about here? Absolutely. Yeah. Completely. Those who love must hurt. In exactly the take the thorn out kind of sense, right? Do you know what you are? If you are a parent who ensures that your child always is pleased, always is happy, always gets just exactly what they want at every moment of every day, so that no moment of their day is clouded by the vaguest thwarting of their will, you are a bad parent if that's what happens, right? I mean, that's simply the reality, right? It is true that those who love must hurt. If you love your child, say no to them, right? If you love your child, show them the way to go. Don't just let them go any way that they think is not right. I mean, like that's, yes, absolutely. She's right about the pulling out of thorns, right? Cal Elros says, hashtag Dudley Dursley. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So again, like, is she right? Yeah, totally right in one sense, right? What she's saying isn't wrong. It's just ill-applied. If she were actually speaking to a 6-year-old, there'd be nothing wrong with that paragraph, right? I mean, again, even sentences like, you will let me rule and guide you. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's a little heavy for a conversation with a 6-year-old, but, like, you know, you can have a go. That might fly. But yeah, the problem is that's not the situation. And notice how Psyche immediately goes there. Orual, I have a husband to guide me now, right? It was difficult not to be angered or terrified by her harping on it. I bit my lip, then said, alas, child, it is about that very husband, as you call him, that I must grieve you, right? Ouch. By saying, I have a husband to guide me now, she is on the one hand playing a sort of trump card, right, over the parental authority that, so the Orual has decided to lead this conversation, right, with a strong parental authority play, right, and Psyche immediately plays her trump card there, actually. But it's not just about like, oh, hey, I don't have to obey you anymore, tee-hee, right? She's by saying I'm a married adult woman, she's also saying, dude, I'm not a 6-year-old, right? I am an independent and adult woman who is now married, right? So it's not just that she has a husband to whom she must obey, especially when he's the god. But again, she's quite gently pointing out that the entire approach that Orual has just taken, true as it is in a different context, is not in any way appropriate here. But of course, in doing so, in making that emphasis, she has struck a nerve, right? And Orual's response is to be both angered and terrified. One or the other, maybe both, by her harping on it. She just mentioned it the once. I mean, she had talked about it before, right? But that she is immediately goes there, right? About the husband. It's angering and terrifying. Yeah, husband-wife stuff really sets Orual off. Absolutely agree with you, Leaf of Starlight. Yes. Oh, Mighty Felix, what a marvelous question. Does it ever occur to Orual that if we must hurt those we love, maybe Psyche must hurt her? No, don't think it does. Though Psyche has been gently trying to say that, right? And trying to soften that blow. I still love you, right? But I can't be what you want me to. I can't remain your child. I've grown up. I'm married now. Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right, let's keep going. But think, Psyche, nothing that's beautiful hides its face. Nothing that's honest hides its name. No, listen. In your heart you must see the truth, however you try to brazen it out with words. Think, whose bride were you called? The brute's. And think again. If it's not the brute, who else dwells in these mountains? Thieves and murderers, men worse than brutes, and lecherous as goats, we may be sure. Are you a prize they'd let pass if you fell in their way? There's your lover, child. Either a monster, shadow and monster in one, maybe, a ghostly undead thing, or a salt villain whose lips, even on your feet or the hem of your robe, would be a stain to our blood. Okay. That's those the only options, right? She was silent a long time, her eyes on her lap. And so, Psyche, I began at last, tenderly as I could, but she tossed away the hand that I had laid on hers. You mistake me, Orual. If I am pale, it is with anger. There, sister, I have conquered it. I'll forgive you. You mean, I'll believe you mean, nothing but good. Yet how, or why, you can have blackened and tormented your soul with such thoughts. But no more of that. If ever you loved me, put them away now. This appeal by Psyche here is, I think, it's easy to miss. And it's easy to miss. It's made easy to miss, I believe, because of how quickly Orual slides past it, right? And again, Orual is such a persuasive narrator, right? She's such a compelling narrator, narrative voice, that it's easy to lose yourself in the momentum of Orual's own passion and emotions. It's hard not to read this section and never, ask any uncomfortable questions about Orual and her motivations, I will admit. However, I do think the kind of reading and discussion that we're doing here, the kind of close reading we're doing of these paragraphs, makes Orual look 5 times worse than when you just read it at speed. That's been my experience. My experience is that it is very easy to get drawn in, to get swept away by Orual's narrative voice. She is always addressing, she continues to address us as readers. She continues to recruit us to her side, right? When you stop and really think through what she's saying and what she's doing and the ways that we're doing, the ugliness, Orual's ugliness of mind here, not just of body and face, becomes clearer, right? But I just want to point out the fact that I think in some way we're not quite doing Orual credit. She doesn't hold up as well when you stop and look at it closely. I'm not saying that the story doesn't hold up as well. It absolutely does. We do, when we stop and really look at it, we can see what lies behind, right? We can see the depths, or at least we can begin to see the depths of Orual's kind of psychological situation, right? Orual's speech, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that in the first half of this slide, because of course what we see her doing is a kind of rapid fire regurgitation of both Bardia's and the Fox's analyses, right? Which she throws out at Psyche without attempting to reconcile them, even though they're in opposition to each other. And also notice how much worse she makes them than Bardia or the Fox did, right? Remember, the Fox was willing to hope maybe the beggar who found Psyche might not be horrible, right? Whereas here, Orual calls him a salt villain. Whose lips even on your feet or on the hem of your robe would be a stain to our blood. Compared to Bardia's quiet words about the brute, Orual's shadow and monster in one may be a ghostly undead thing is a little extra, right? So anyway, we get those things, right? But I want to just touch on, because I think it's a really wonderful point. What Jackrabbit was just saying, nothing that's beautiful hides its face, is an assumption Orual makes because she is not beautiful, and if she were, she wouldn't hide her face. Yeah. Nothing that's beautiful hides its face is this paragraph is about Psyche's husband, right? But you're absolutely right, Jackrabbit, that there are ways in which even these accusations, this paragraph itself folds back onto Orual as well, right? Nothing that's beautiful hides its face. Well, then what about you, Orual, right? And not just her physical ugliness, right? What about, her own stern love for Psyche here? Is that beautiful? Is that showing its face clearly? A lot of this does sort of splash back onto Orual fairly significantly. And I do really like the point. Finrob Felagund was saying the way that even Orual tells us to judge her makes us side with her. Yeah, I agree. That thinking about again how compelling she is as a narrator, and we've talked about how honest she is, and certainly convinces us that she's being honest. She's not holding back. Certainly not holding back in her own favor. Many of the things that she describes are not only shameful, are not only like wrong, but also shameful, but also just like embarrassing, childish, even. Yeah. No, Orual is not. Well, hang on. Orual was veiled. She was veiled because I believe she was veiled in mourning for Psyche still. So she is veiled when she's with Bardia and when she's with Graham. Because, yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, there's actually a moment when she takes off her veil when she's with Psyche. But I do believe she put on her veil when the description of her getting ready to go, I think, included her putting on her veil. But yes, the veiling of Orual that's going to come in the next, like a couple of chapters down the road, is not quite there yet. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There is nowhere in this book where thinking about people's faces, whether their faces are covered or revealed, whether their faces are, I mean, like, it's always worthwhile thinking about people's faces in this book. It always works. Okay. But let's get back to Psyche's reaction, which is what I mainly wanted to talk about here. Psyche's angry. If I am pale, it is with anger. But watch what happens. Watch what happens. You see the activity, the action that occurs here? There, sister, I have conquered it. I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you. Future tense. She declares her determination to forgive Orual. She first overcomes her passion. Remember, this is exactly what the fox kept telling Orual to do, and Orual was like not doing a great job of that, right? Letting her passion sweep her away. Here is Psyche experiencing strong passion, but mastering it. She has, I think the fox would say, she has progressed further than Orual has, right? Which again comes back to the whole parent-child shtick that Orual's got going on in this conversation. But anyway, I'll forgive you. I am going to forgive you. I will forgive you. I am making a plan to take a concrete action. I'm choosing to forgive you. I will forgive you does not mean I no longer feel bothered by what you said. It doesn't mean I think what you did and said was fine. I will forgive you means you just did something bad. I have a kind of right to hold a grudge against you for what you just did. But I am making a choice not to do that. I will forgive you. And then notice in her next sentence, you mean, I'll believe you mean. Future tense again. I am setting myself on the future-oriented course of believing that you mean nothing but good. Eric, I don't mean future tense in the sense that she's like, I haven't done it yet, but I plan, I'll forgive you next week or something like that. No, it's standing at the point in the present, facing the future, right? She is stepping into that future is the point, is what we see happening here, right? That is what I will do starting now, right? She is making the deliberate choice to step off into that future where she forgives Orual for what Orual said, and where she will believe that Orual means nothing but good. Again, that correction. She almost said, you mean nothing but good. But that is a mere assertion, an interpretive assertion, right, of Orual's heart. And she takes it back, or she corrects it in the middle. Hang on. No. Not gonna merely assert that you mean nothing but good. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'm going to choose to believe that you mean nothing but good. That's the choice I'm going to make, just as I'm making a choice to forgive you. We have seen Orual make choices like this, though not usually in that direction, right? But here we see Psyche choosing to give Orual the benefit of the doubt, choosing to forgive her, choosing to believe that she means nothing but good, that her own love and her own desire to seek Psyche's well-being has led her to say the horrible things that she just said. Now, what is Psyche angry at exactly? How or why you can have blackened and tormented your soul with such thoughts. But no more of that. If ever you loved me, put them away now. She almost asks, she speculates about two questions. How can Orual have blackened and tormented her soul with such thoughts? How? How could Orual think that? How? And then, relatedly, why would Orual think that? How? You can see why she asks the how question. The answer to the how question is an uncomfortable one. How can Orual have tormented her soul with such thoughts? Answer: by disbelieving Psyche, by refusing to take Psyche's word for her own experience. Psyche has told her her story. Psyche has told her what happened to her. Who knows best about Psyche's experience? Is it Psyche who experienced it, or is it Orual? Well, we see Orual's perspective on that. She's quite clear about who has the authority on that question, right? Psyche's little more than a child, after all. And yet Psyche is now actively choosing to give Orual the benefit of the doubt before this moment of anger. The passion she's overcome with is being confronted with the fact that Orual does not mean nothing but good. Orual could only say those horrible things about Psyche's, marriage, right, about Psyche's husband, if she didn't believe her, right? And Psyche seems to have not believed that Orual was capable of that. That's the how. But what about the why? Why would you have tormented your soul with such thoughts? You have to choose that. You had a choice to believe me or not to believe me. Why wouldn't you believe me? Why would that be? Yeah. Yeah. Maureen, yeah, and of course we don't want to get away from the really simple thing that Orual said horrible things about her husband that she loves. Absolutely. right? It's not only on her own behalf that she's offended, right? My emphasis here has been on Psyche's own perception of her relationship with Orual and on the damage that Orual is doing to her relationship with Psyche through that speech, right? Because that seems to be one of the things that she is... if it weren't for that, if it weren't for Orual and Psyche's relationship in that way, neither the how and the why are very hard to understand. How could you blacken and torment your soul with such thoughts? Well, because how are you to know, right? Bardia and the fox both think it's perfectly natural, right, to conclude that. Why is it that Psyche is surprised to hear that Orual thinks this way, these ways? Because she believed that she had enough capital, right, relationship capital, with Orual, that Orual would at least be willing to believe what she told her and not assume one of the two things, the Bardia thing or the fox thing. Yeah. And Ambrosius Aurelianus, of course, you're perfectly right, that it's not only the reaction of a wife for her beloved husband, but also of a worshiper for her beloved God. Yes. Yeah, there's blasphemy involved there as well. Yep. True. Last thing to notice, and I'm making very slow progress through my slides today, which does not augur well, but I don't care. Notice the substance of Psyche's appeal. Having just done what she just did, she says, "No more of that. If ever you loved me, put them away now." Having just made in real time, while she was talking, her own positive decisions, her own decisions of love and forgiveness and benefit of the doubt that she is extending to Orual, she now calls upon Orual to reciprocate. If ever you loved me, put them away now. She puts it on the table. Make the choice. You can make the choice to believe me. And yes, Eric, I do think there's an echo there. Put them away is the kind of phrase you use of childish things when it's time to grow up. Yeah, I do think there's an echo there. Put these thoughts away from you. And yes, as several of you were pointing out, the reverse parental thing. We see Psyche being a good parent here, and acting more and more parental all the time. Yeah. Yep. When Orual tries to back up her horrible statements with the authority of the fox and Bardia, Psyche says, "You have told them my story, Orual? It was ill done. I gave you no leave. My lord gave you no leave. My lord gave no leave. Oh, Orual, it was more like Bata than you." Bata, the palace gossip, malicious gossiper. "I could not help it if my face reddened with anger, but I would not be turned aside. Doubtless, I said, there is no end to the secrecy of this husband, as you call him. Child, has his vile love so turned your brain that you can't see the plainest thing? A god? Yet on your own showing he hides and slinks and whispers mum and keep counsel and don't betray me like a runaway slave?" I am not certain she had listened to this. What she said was, "The fox too? That is very strange. I never thought he would have believed in the brute at all." I had not said that he did, but if that was what she took out of my words, I thought it no part of my duty to set her right. It was an error helping her towards the main truth. I had need of all help to drive her thither. Sorry. Sorry. Curious chances. I can't believe it's not bad. Yikes. Yeah, yes, exactly. And yes, Eric is quoting 1 Corinthians 13, which is where that that echo comes from. When I was a child, I talked as a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. I put away the things of childhood. Yeah, exactly. I do think that's where the echo lies in that very famous passage. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Mighty Felix, I think you have exactly caught Orual here. I have said many times, I was just saying a couple minutes ago, that Orual is a very honest narrator most of the time. There are a couple times when I think we can catch her in a piece of dishonesty. Not just a time when she lies when her character, when she in the past lied to another character in the past. She will sometimes describe something like that, or even confess it, that she spoke something that wasn't true. But her narration has generally been reliable, or seemed so anyway. Has been honest. But that moment that Mighty Felix was pointing to, I think, is exactly a moment where we catch her being dishonest with us. I could not help it if my face reddened with anger. Oh, I'm sure your face reddened, right? Orual is terribly and unexpectedly wrong-footed by this. It never even occurred to her that she was not allowed to tell Psyche's story to other people. She told Bardia and she told the fox without a second thought. It never occurred to her, and when she's confronted with this, it was ill done. I gave you no leave. She is getting scolded like she is the child. And what's more, she knows she's in the wrong. It's true. Psyche didn't give her permission. She was wrong to tell other people the story without she was wrong to tell the story without permission, and she knows it. Is she feeling anger here? Yeah, it's not technically a lie, I think. Is she angry? Yes, she's angry. But I think she's embarrassed. I think she's blushing. There's shame here. Shame which the anger is covering here. And I think that that's significant. I think that that's significant because this is also, in this very moment, a place where we see her act dishonestly towards Psyche as well. Not by an active lie, but by an active omission of the truth. What she had just, I didn't quote the thing that she had just said, but the thing that she had just said, you made it sound, accidentally sound, I don't think Orual intended it, sound as if the fox and Bardia were both united in agreeing that her husband must be the brute, right? Psyche is just like, whoa, really? I can't believe the fox believed in the brute at all. That's so weird, right? Notice, by the way, the thing that Orual said that has confused Psyche. We saw in her charged statement about the husband, the brute or the criminal. How she proposes these two contradictory theories of Bardia and the fox and spits them both out at once in one paragraph at Psyche, as if they were not in any way contradictory, right? Though they clearly are. It's that muddle, right? The fact that she's just throwing these things out there as if they don't contradict, as if Bardia and the fox are somehow united against Psyche, which is totally not true, right? It's that sloppiness that she's using, which was sort of the first dishonesty, and now she allows the misunderstanding to stand, right? Because it helps her towards the main truth. If error will help her to get there, then it is no part of her duty to set her right. Lots of rationalization here. I think that this passage is important for a couple reasons. One, because we do see that Orual can lie to us, that sometimes she is insufficiently honest with herself to be honest with us. But secondly, we can see that this is a significant erosion of Orual's moral standing here. A demonstration of the weakness of Orual's argument here. Yeah. Psyche's response. But what is all this to me? How should they know? I am his wife. I know. How can you know if you have never seen him? Or, oh, sorry, I messed up. That should be a new paragraph, I think. How can you know if you have never seen him? Orual, how can you be so simple? How can I not know? But how, Psyche? What am I to answer to such a question? It's not fitting. It is, and especially to you, sister, who are a virgin. That matronly primness from the child she was went near to ending my patience. It was almost, but I think now she did not mean it so, as if she taunted me. Yet I ruled myself. Look at whose overcoming passion, so admirable. Well, if you are so sure, Psyche, you will not refuse to put it to the test. What test? Though I need none myself. Psyche here comes to the core issue that she was already pointing at before. I don't, at the end of the day, really care what Bardia's theory is or what the fox's theory is. They're theorizing about something they don't know about. They can't know about. They've never experienced. Orual herself has experienced more just by coming up onto the mountaintop and into the valley, right? Bardia's been closer than the fox in this respect. But he at least saw Psyche herself. But he doesn't go into the valley, right? He's not sitting on the steps of the palace. He is not given a vision of the palace itself, right? Like Orual is. And yet Psyche, she's experienced it. She's experienced it. How can you know what he's not like a lustful salt villain or an undead ghost thing? And Psyche's like, is this a trick question? Right? Like, Orual, how can you be so simple? How could I not know? Right? It's like, she's like, do you want me to? What are the things that Psyche is not saying here? And I'm not saying that we need to get X-rated about this. I'm just saying, to put it lightly, there are other senses other than sight, Orual, and I have employed those. All of the rest of them, probably, in one way or another, right? She has experienced her husband very directly. For Orual to say, how can you know if you've never seen him, sounds to Psyche simple. Simple. Like, it's like, how can you be so simple? How I mean, that's ridiculous. How am I to answer such a question? How can I know him? I mean, and she stumbles here. She's like, I can't, do you want to play by play? Like, seriously? Like, no, I can't do that. It's not fitting, especially to you who are a virgin. Like, you have never known someone in this way. By the way, Psyche's experience here, there's one group of people who would be utterly unable to comprehend Psyche's certainty, and that's heroes of Shakespearean comedies, who seem almost universally incapable of telling one woman from another in the dark, right? I mean, that's that many times is seen, right? It's yeah. So, but anyway, with the exception of Shakespearean comic heroes, anyway, that's Twelfth Night in a nutshell. Yeah, it's like all of most of Shakespeare's comedies, right? Yeah, Mighty Felix, I was thinking about Arthur and his knights too, right? Yeah, like a knight with his visor down, also utterly unrecognizable, right? Same kind of rule. But yeah, no, it's well known that if lights are off or armor is involved, humans are completely indistinguishable from each other. Yes, exactly. But of course, that's exactly the thing that Lewis is kind of brushing against here, right? There's a different kind of realism at play here. In both of those cases, both in Sir Thomas Malory, which many of us read together, right, over the course of like an entire year. In Sir Thomas Malory, there's this like polite fiction that we're supposed to accept, right? It makes the story go. And we are asked, as readers, almost explicitly asked, to indulge that belief, right? To accept it as a parameter of the narrative. And if we do, the rest of the story goes on just fine, right? And that's the same thing in Shakespearean comedies, right? We are asked to just accept that fact, right? Lewis here, Psyche, is having none of that, right? The polite fiction in Shakespearean comedies, the polite fiction that you can't tell one woman from another in the dark. Yes. Jack Rabbit, it's true that the same thing happens with Jacob and Leah. But I'm pretty sure there's alcohol involved, which is also sometimes true of Shakespearean comic heroes. I will also concede, but not always. Not always. I'm pretty sure. I mean, Genesis doesn't explicitly say that Jacob was hammered when he was led to his tent at the end of the wedding ceremony, but I have a hard time reading that story without imagining that is true. Anyway, Exactly. It's the long wedding feast. That anyway. Yeah, I think especially given the other precedent, like the story with the creepy story with Lot and his daughters also makes me think that the whole getting drunk and I think there was liquor. Whatever. Anyway, not important. Here, her matronly primness, right? Notice with Orual here. Notice what bothers her. What bothers her, first and foremost, is this moment, once again, a piece of evidence. Going back to remember the very beginning of the conversation, when Orual comes on strong with the maternal talk, right, with the parental authority, and Psyche immediately plays the "but I am married now," i.e., not a child anymore card, right? And once again, she's being confronted by that fact. That matronly primness from the child she was. This almost desperate assertion. It was absurd. It makes me impatient that a child like her would indulge in such matronly primness. No, what you're being confronted with is evidence that she is an adult and quite independent of you. And in some ways, in that one way, like the fact that Psyche is not a virgin, that Psyche has had an adult experience that Orual has not, is not only evidence that Psyche is no longer a child, but it's evidence that Psyche has, in at least one way, in fact gone beyond Orual in experience. Orual tries to, be like, I am the experienced one who has the authority because I know much and you know little, right? There's at least one thing of which Psyche unquestionably has knowledge and experience that Orual does not, and Orual knows she has no rebuttal against that. Orual is still a virgin. Psyche is not. And that is like the whole tip of the iceberg, right? That is tip of the experiential. I like the just one way in which, if you concede that thing, right? If Orual were to concede that thing, then it undermines the entire posture that she's taking from the start. Yes. Okay. Oh, Orual, what evil you think! The reason I cannot look at him, least of all by such trickery as you'd have me do, is that he has forbidden me. I can think, Bardia and the fox can think, of one reason only for such a forbidding, and of one only for your obeying it. Then you know little of love. You fling my virginity in my face again, do you? Better it than the sty you're in, so be it. Of what you now call love, I do know nothing. You can whisper about it to Redival better than to me, or to Ungit's girls, maybe, or the king's doxies. I know another sort of love. You shall find what it's like. You shall not. Orual, you are raving, said Psyche, herself unangered, gazing at me large-eyed, sorrowful, but nothing humble about her sorrow. You would have thought she was my mother, not I, almost, hers. I had known this long time, that the old meek biddable Psyche was gone forever, yet it shocked me afresh. Yes, Jackie, you're exactly right that she's throwing the fox in there to bolster her position, and like the fox, Psyche is disturbed by Orual's behavior. Yes, you are raving is just exactly what the fox said, right? Yes, the way that Orual brings in the fox to supplement her authority, and yet acts in exactly the way that makes the fox literally throw his hands up in the air, right? There's intense irony there. Yeah, yeah. Yep. Interesting, Sarah. Sarah says it's so sad that Orual keeps having these insights and keeps totally ignoring them. Yes. Yes. Oh, the richness of that one short sentence of Psyche's. Then you know little of love. If they can think of only one reason for her obeying such a forbidding. By the way, I'm not even sure what it is. Fear? I mean, there's actually a whole variety of like unsavory reasons that Orual seems to be hinting at, right? Fear, possibly. What? Lust? Like, yeah, he's a salt villain, but he's good in bed, so what the heck? Like, I mean, she goes there, right? Comparing Psyche to the king's doxies, to the king's mistresses, right? Then you know little of love, is the wisdom of Psyche there. If you can only think of these reasons for obeying it, he has forbidden me to see his face, and I love him and trust him, so I don't want to see his face because I trust him. I know him and love him and trust him. That's a reason. The cruelly painful irony of this moment is, of course, that's what Orual herself was banking on in this whole conversation. Because you love me and care about me and trust me, you should listen to me and do what I say. Like, that's the entire capital she's spending in this conversation. And yet, she can't see it, won't see it, refuses to see it as being applied by Psyche to her husband, right? This husband and Psyche's love for her husband and desire to obey her husband and, this reverence for her divine husband is something that has driven her to impatience. And that, by the way, I think is another little slight dishonesty in Orual's narration. Does it make her come close to losing her patience? Yeah, I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm saying it's not the whole story, right? There's more to it than that. Yeah. And yes, Feanaro, you're certainly right. Orual has never had a physical relationship and never will. I imagine her idea of romantic love as being much simpler. Yes. One of the saddest things about Psyche's statement is that it's perfectly true as respect to Eros. I made it funny. Eros, of course, is the Greek name of the god who marries Psyche, right? She does indeed know little of Eros. She does not know the god. Wasn't even actually. I just meant sexual love. But anyway, like literally, it's literally Eros, right? Anyway. So, but the point is, yes, she does not know anything about romantic love, right? It's true and sad. She's never had that opportunity. It's one of the reasons why Psyche is so important to her. Why Psyche is all that she has, or at least why she feels that Psyche is all that she has. Right. Oh, Ambrosius, I totally think it's an intentional pun on Lewis's part. Yes. Absolutely. That eros, sexual love, is the thing that Orual. Notice, just as any reference to Psyche's, whenever Psyche says "my husband," Orual gets mad and impatient, right? Just so, any reference to her sexual relationship, to her eros with her husband, and therefore indirectly to Orual's own virginity, also sets Orual off in the same way, right? Yeah, it's all about the eros there. And yes, JJ, you're right. There's her own, that she is willing to, Orual, partly, no doubt, Fanaro, as you suggest, because of her ignorance, knows nothing of eros, of what you now call love, eros, sexual love. I do know nothing. And she prides herself on that. She looks down on sexual love. That's like a Redival thing. Kissing Tarin under the window. That's an Ungit thing. People going to copulate with Ungit's girls in the temple. That's a king's mistresses things. And all the bastards, the bastard children, right, running around the palace. Remember, that was described. She speaks with disdain of that kind of love. Because, of course, Psyche is perfectly right. You know little of love. She doesn't. She knows very little indeed of eros. Because you're right, Emily, she's never seen a healthy sexual relationship in her entire life. Never has. Yeah. And Judy, Psyche's devotion absolutely does go beyond a sexual connection. I'm not trying to reduce Psyche's relationship with the god only to eros, though that's hard to say without feeling odd about it, because it is eros, the god. But whatever. Yeah, I'm not trying to reduce it to merely like sexual desire. That's not the point. The point, in many ways, what I'm coming back to is that sentence, then you know little of love. Of course, some of you I know C.S. Lewis's book, The Four Loves, when he talks about the four different Greek words which can be translated as love. Eros, sexual love. Philia, friendship. Storge, which is like affection for family members. And agape. And through this passage, when we're kind of flopping back and forth between different senses of love, sexual love, that like eros, I just have to say it without stopping to laugh at it. The eros love is definitely at play here in this conversation, or in this exchange right here. So is the storge love, the mother love, mother-child love, major thing going on here. So is agape, which Psyche was just showing to Orual when she forgave her and decided to think nothing but the best of her. So too even is Philia, the friendship that the two of them have had as sisters throughout their lives. All of those loves are relevant to these two women, right? To this situation, to the thing that they're talking about. And when Psyche says, "You know little of love," I think she's referring to romantic love. Like, that's the primary referent of that sentence. You don't understand, like, what being married is like, if you can't think of any good reason for obeying such a forbidding. But of course, once she says it, it resonates outward. No, Orual doesn't. She does know little of love, of any kind of love. And this is tragic in multiple ways, right? Tragic because Orual is showing herself, as much as she's convinced herself that she's the one showing stern love, the deepest kind of love for Psyche in this conversation. She's shown indeed that she knows little of love. And of course, as several of you have pointed out, she has herself received little love, comparatively little love. No love from her own parents, abuse from her father, her mother dead at a young age. Except, well, there was the fox, and there was Psyche, and there was Webathon. So there was some love around, but, yeah. It is, Maureen, such an intense dialogue, a total transfer of power and reversal of mother-daughter roles in this scene. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, well, I didn't do too well. No, okay. Well, we'll have to finish chapter 4. We'll finish the apocalypses next time. Next time, odds are we won't get past chapter 15 next time. These central chapters are really important. I promise we're going to move a little faster after chapter 15. We're going to hit on some things, but there will be a number of chapters where we will go faster, I promise. We will... I'm going to spend some time on chapter 15. I was choosing passages for chapter 15, and I was like, what on earth do I skip? Like, is there a skippable paragraph in this chapter? Not sure there is. So I didn't skip many of them. Yeah, so reread chapter 14 and 15. We'll try to go on and I'll see if we can get past it, but no promises. Yes, next week. No. Shoot. Next week is Thanksgiving week. I cannot meet next week because I will be picking up my adult child, whom I will try not to address as a 6-year-old, at the airport next week during class time. So yes, not meeting Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, as I will be delightedly picking up my child from the airport. So it'll be the week after that, the 29th of November. Absolutely. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Don't forget to fill out the form again, because I'm going to do another drawing, and we'll have 2 weeks to do the drawing. But don't forget to fill it out if you haven't yet, so we can enter you for drawing number 2, which will happen in 2 weeks. All right? Thanks, everybody. Bye now.